in the Web3 messaging space is that it's not just a messaging application. It's also potentially like a payment or like financial like rails, and also like potentially a place for mini apps to be hosted as well. So you're talking then more about like wallet integration, and then also like building these like kind of frames inside of the application that developers can use to distribute to their users.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 66 of Colors of Web3 and Entrepreneurship. My name is Lam, your Web3 host. For those of you who are new to the show, Colors of Web3 and Entrepreneurship is a show highlighting the journeys of builders and innovators in Web3 and entrepreneurship. Some topics, especially in Web3, make it technical, but we do our best to keep it accessible for most people. Here today, I'm joined by Kee Jefferys. He's the technical co-founder of Session. Kee, could you give a quick introduction by yourself?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me on the podcast. As you said, my name's Kee. I'm one of the co-founders of Session, focusing more on the kind of technical side of things. So helping manage some of the developers that work on Session, coming up with ideas about architecture, and essentially like laying out some of the roadmap for, what Session is going to try and do in the future, or at least coming up with some technical designs for how that should be done.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. So I think one thing I'm always curious about is like, I know that founding a company is usually always tough, but I think always interested in learning about the person, behind the company. So if you could share a bit more about your professional background, feel free to pick a time, maybe when you were from college, working, forward up until the present day position. That'll be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I'm pretty young at this point, so I don't actually have much of a professional history before getting into blockchain, but I was studying computer science at university. And I think one of my lecturers in passing mentioned the idea of cryptocurrency being an interesting implementation of asymmetric encryption, which was something that we were studying at the time for computer science. I remember learning then about Bitcoin, or relearning more about it, because I think I'd encountered it in 2011, but just kind of, thought, oh, this is just a fad, like most people do. So then I started to dive deeper and deeper, and this was in like 2017, I think. Started going to like some blockchain meetups, met up with a bunch of other founders. Well, they weren't really founders. They were just young guys who we all had ideas. We all enjoyed decentralized technology. So we were looking at stuff like Tor. We were looking at stuff like decentralized cryptocurrencies, especially privacy preserving ones. So like Monero and Zcash. And we were kind of interested in, how can we combine these ideas together to form something that's like more than a sum of its parts? So can we build like a decentralized network which secures people's privacy, but also allows applications to be run on top of that decentralized network? And that was kind of the original like core idea. In 2018, we got a little bit of funding, and we were able to take that and build out essentially like the network as it is today. It's been 7 years since that point. So I think that was in 2018, and the project has grown significantly since then. And like the key thing that we've kind of worked on over the last like 4 or 5 years has been Session. So it's an end-to-end encrypted messaging application, and has over 1 million monthly active users now. So yeah, it's been a long journey to get here, but definitely worth all of the effort.
Nice, cool. Yeah, sounds like you've done quite a lot. So I think you mentioned you studied computer science in university, and then did you do anything between the time of founding Session and then after graduating from university?
Yeah, so I was actually on an internship. The university that I was going to had this kind of internship program where halfway through your degree, you were able to like go out into industry and like try out a few things. So I think I was put in like a corporate like company, and I was doing like a bit of database administration, system administration there. And then after I finished that, we decided to start the company, and that was 1.5 years into the computer science degree. So technically I deferred, to come back at the later point, because I thought, this is one of those opportunities that you don't get all of the time. So let's see how it goes. 7 years later, I'm still working at that company that we founded. And I think to go back to university, they have some sort of cutoff time. So you have to like resume your deferment after like 5 years or something. So I think if I wanted to go back to computer science, I'd probably have to start the degree again. But I've probably gathered so much more experience, like just working at a company and having my fingers in a lot of pies. But yeah, I'm technically deferred still, perhaps.
I see. Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah. No, I've heard a lot of great story about like dropouts, right? Because I feel like this day and age, I probably don't even need a degree that much anymore. Degree is not that much important, especially in Web3, right? The industry, whereas like I don't think even having a degree means much in Web3 anyway. Because there's a lot of things like, yeah, you can't really learn like a lot of these Web3 in school anyway, because curriculum is always I would say few years, or at least few years, or even more than that behind. Yeah.
I think the crypto space like moves so fast that if you were to design a curriculum for it, yeah, it would already be like 2 or 3 years out of date before actually got that curriculum through and got people studying it. Like the trends that were popular, even a year and a half ago, like DeFi and NFTs and meme coins, like people would just move on from those things. And then there's like new paradigms that emerge. So it's hard to like keep on the edge of that. And it's the same like when you're looking at candidates that come across your desk, like to hire, you're not usually looking at, okay, do they have a university degree? Like that's not something that is cared about that much. It's more about like, can you show us some projects that you built? Like, what's your portfolio like look like of like things you've worked on? That's much more important than, just, oh, you went to this university and you got this certificate.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some great advice that you just shared right there, because I think some of the listener to my podcast also always curious about like how can I break into Web3, right? From with like maybe either from like a non-IT background or maybe non even technical background, things like that, right? So that's always
yeah. Look, honestly, like if you don't have a background, I mean, going to university and doing a computer science course like gives you a very good foundation to work off. So it's not useless. It's actually very useful. But like the bigger thing these days is like if you just start contributing open source to like projects, oftentimes that's like a very good route to get hired by the project itself, especially with these Web3 projects. If you start diving into some of their core code bases and start contributing there, very often, like, the project will end up like sending you a message or something and being like, hey, do you want to work on the team? Just because there isn't that many people that come and work on the core code bases in different like blockchains. So
yeah, true. I think the open source like an under tap or a route that I feel like many people haven't actually tried to explore yet. I think that's a great route too. I mean, you can learn, meet some great people, and then eventually network your way into where there's like an intern position. I'm not even sure if you have that much intern position in Web3 or not, but I think at least a good way to contribute, and then eventually found your way into some Web3 organization, right? Cool. And then you said you learned about Bitcoin in 2011. Like, was this like did you read the book or did someone teach it to you, or how did you come across?
I think around 2011 there was this kind of price increase in Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin went from like $40 or $50 to maybe $500 or $1,000 or something like that. The narrative around that point was that it was like this Chinese mining like boom that was happening, and then it basically like crashed down and like didn't do too much until 2018. I might be getting my dates slightly wrong there, but I remember hearing about Bitcoin at that point and thinking, oh, this is really cool. I wanted to buy some Bitcoin actually, but at this point I was under 18, so I didn't have a credit card. I had a PayPal account. And I remember going on to Mt. Gox, and there was this like convoluted way that you could get access to Bitcoin, which was basically by buying the Second Life in-game currency that they had. I think it's called Sylvan, something like that. You would take that Sylvan and then you would deposit that to Mt. Gox. And then on Mt. Gox, you could swap between Sylvan and Bitcoin, and then you could withdraw the Bitcoin. And I remember trying this process and like Mt. Gox like banning my account and being like, it seems that you're trying to get around our restrictions or something like that. And I was like, oh well, like, I guess I just won't get Bitcoin. And, it's probably a very financially costly mistake. But yeah, I remember like getting involved there and then like kind of not getting involved for many years after that.
I see. Yeah, cool. But I think we both know afterward that like Mt. Gox actually got hacked, right? And then they lost
Yeah.
like all the fun, and actually it's like I think took like 9 years. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the people who got affected is still refunded yet or not. I saw some announcement that it got refunded, but anyway, I'm not the one affected, so I don't know. But yeah, it's so it might be a good, might be a bad thing. I don't know, but yeah,
It might have been a more sorry story if I had have bought a bunch of Bitcoin then and then the Mt.
right.
Gox hack happened.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe I was saved.
Yeah, that was pretty huge back in that time too. I think that was like very early 2014. I remember when this got hacked. Yeah, it was like here in Tokyo, Japan. Actually, pretty like cool, interesting. So were you actually playing games there, or you just wanted to like trade Bitcoin? So you had to like circumvent that, right? Yeah.
I think I was like mostly interested in it from a financial perspective, like very early on. Like I hadn't really read like much of what Bitcoin was about. I remember going on to like Googling stuff about Bitcoin very early on, and there just wasn't many resources to find out about how Bitcoin worked. Like you could read the white paper, but there wasn't like, a lot of educational like content that like there is today. Like Andreas Antonopoulos, like those videos, and then there's like a bunch of like good videos which explain blockchain and how it works from a very basic level, and then like build up on that. But at that point, it was basically like Bitcoin talk, and I think there was like a Stack Overflow for like Bitcoin where you could go, or a Stack Exchange for Bitcoin where you could read some questions. I just remember having a question like very early on, which was like, what happens if the blockchain like just gets very large? Like, is everyone going to have to store this blockchain like forever? And it's like 100 gigabytes. Like, what if it grows larger? Um, that was kind of maybe like early intuition around like some of the block size debates that happened over the course of like 2017 and 18. But yeah, there wasn't that much information technically about Bitcoin other than the white paper and the source code at that point, and I wasn't really well equipped to read into those papers.
Yeah, I bet. No, I think even a CS graduate with even with mathematics background would still find that white paper like a bit daunting. I would say, yeah, cool. So that's interesting that how you encounter Bitcoin though, and then discover that. Yeah, that's really cool. There's been a few guests on my podcast who's also been super early, so I've just been hearing a lot of like stories about them in their very early days, like who have lived through like I would say like 3 cycles already, which seem like an eternity, right? Yeah, so they've seen it all. Cool.
Yeah, even coming in at 2018, like I've been working full time like in the blockchain space since 2018. So I've seen a few cycles at this point, like 2018 bear, then like the 2021 after like DeFi summer, things went really bad after that. And then there was like obviously the current bull run, and like, no one's really sure what type of market we're in right now either. Like,
No, that's true. Yeah, I mean it's very hard to predict the future, but yeah, you just have to. Yeah, I think hindsight is easy, right? If you were to say, but like yeah, predicting future is hard. So I'm gonna leave it to the experts or whatever. I'll leave it to the market. So leave it to the market safer. Anyway, so yeah, before we deep dive into the company, maybe just one fun question. Can you share with us what do you do for fun in your free time, your hobbies?
it's going to sound a bit boring, but I enjoy programming in my spare time. So I actually don't get to do a lot of programming at work. It's more kind of high level, like architecture and design and like squashing issues and managing teams and stuff like that. So I don't actually get as much time as I'd like to program. So I spend a lot of my personal time programming. I enjoy rock climbing as well, and just getting out and about and bushwalking and hiking and stuff. So yeah.
Nice. But were you coding a lot more back in like the early days of session?
Honestly, like we pretty quickly hired a bunch of developers. So the team didn't stay super small for a long time, and then there was also like a lot of architectural work that went on at the very early stages as well. So like writing the white paper, and then just like working out how this node network was going to host applications on top of it. So like I haven't really been programming except for maybe like stints of a couple of months here and there, like when something goes wrong or like we need an extra hand.
Makes sense. Cool. Yeah. What is your favorite programming languages then that you use?
Mostly these days, I'm writing Python.
Nice.
Just
Python.
because it's very easy to write, and you can represent a lot, like in very few lines of code, basically. So it's a very powerful scripting language, which is what I find I'm doing most these days.
For sure. Yeah, I used to program a lot more in Python as well. I think going from Python 2 to 3, significant improvement, right? And of course, like all the machine learning language, it's like mainly still based in like Python, right? Deep learning, things like that too. That's cool. Actually, so I think since we're in like 2025, I just want to ask you one question. What is your take about like vibe coding? You probably have seen or heard this term before.
I like early on when some of the AI tools came out, I was like fairly skeptical because like the code that they were giving back was not very good and still required a lot of like changes to get working in projects. This was kind of when GPT-3 like first got released, I think was when I started to like start using it like a little bit more. But honestly, like things have gotten like the pace of acceleration in AI, especially for programming, has been so huge. Like in the last like 3 years, it's just gotten better and better and better. So I find myself like using the AI tools like to code a lot more, like to the point where you're like somewhat an observer, like of like it's writing a majority of the code, and this is like also represented. I think the GitHub was saying that like now like 50 or 60% of the code that's uploaded to GitHub is written by AI like agents, either Copilot or Cursor or whatever the developer is using. But you still like a lot of the times need to like step in and tell it that something's bad or like, correct things. It's still not 100% there, but it's getting a lot better than what it was even 2 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I think it has improved a lot. Yeah, I think I don't know, my take on like vibe coding is that I feel like you still need to know how to code, right? Know the fundamental of like CS, like uh, data type, algorithm, things like that, right? Because if you don't, then you can probably get some kind of, I would say, is like half-baked program, half-baked app running, right? But then you probably don't know how to fix it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
The other thing, like I think it's pretty good at writing code, but then when it comes to actually like deploying that code into production, like managing servers, all of that kind of stuff, that's still pretty that's something that you kind of need to learn over time. So you can maybe deploy on like Vercel or something like that, but if you want to scale like to millions of users and not pay ridiculous bills, that's still a side of it that AI can maybe like give you some advice on, but like it's still not great there, and you still need to kind of learn that stuff yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess a short point that we can both agree on is that like the programming job is not gonna go away anytime soon, right?
No, I don't think
Yeah.
so. I think, and like the more esoteric things get as well, like the worse performance AI gives. So like, especially like, it's very good at like JavaScript and Python, just because there's like a lot of code
Yeah.
online for JavaScript and Python. Like it's less good at C, for example. C++ would be less good than say Python or JavaScript. So it just has less training information to train on. So yeah, the results are just tend to get worse like the more low level the programming languages are, and the less like uploaded code there is for it to train on. So I think it's still going to be quite some time before we're talking about like, whether there's going to be AI employees essentially like at working at places. I think it's a tool to increase programmers' productivity right now. It's not a tool to replace programmers yet.
Yeah, true. I think so too. Yeah, there's a lot of these very difficult things like architecting system architecture, but then also like you said, deploying things in production, right? How to run, how to fix things properly, and how to set it up. Yeah, I don't think there's AI would be able to get all the documentation, but also not only that, but also like there's like some contextual knowledge you need to know, right, for a certain program, yeah, for it to work.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So yeah, well, without further ado, let's go ahead and deep dive into your current company session. Feel free to share any presentation or website your company. I think first we'd be curious to hear about like the, I guess, history of the founding. You briefly touch upon it a bit, but yeah, feel free to expand upon that and then talk about Session. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Session at its core is a private messaging application. So you can think of it like Signal or WhatsApp, but a more private version of Signal or WhatsApp. The main three differences that I usually talk about between Session and other messaging applications are: first, it doesn't require a phone number to sign up. So you're reducing your metadata when you actually sign up to the service. Two, it's a decentralized network. So instead of storing all of the messages on centralized nodes run by WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram, it's actually got a community run network of over 2,200 nodes, which are running all around the world by different operators. And that's where it stores and routes messages through. And the third thing being that it deploys onion routing natively as well. So when you use Session, you're actually hiding your IP address when you store messages on that network. So it's disconnecting your IP address, your phone number, and then also removing points of central control in the network as well. So it's really offers a experience that isn't offered by any other messaging application, which keeps you more private, and then also like ensures the security of the data that's being stored on the network as well. So that's probably the main focus that I'd have like when I'm explaining what Session is.
Nice. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I mean, in at the very core, it's like a messaging app like WhatsApp and Telegram, right? Except it's would you say it's like the message is all like decentralized, storing on 2,000 nodes, right? And then so end-to-end encryption is probably there also.
Yeah, every message you send on Session is end-to-end encrypted.
Mm.
And like just to describe like the nature of the decentralized network as well, you can imagine like a very naive like construction here would be, okay, when I send a message to someone, I temporarily store it on a single node. And then if that user is offline, then they go and fetch it from that single node, and then they pull it down so that they can decrypt and read the message. The issue with that kind of naive construction is that if one of the nodes on the network goes offline, then your message also is offline. So the recipient can't retrieve it anymore. What Session does is it actually has this kind of next layer on top of that 2,200 nodes called swarms. And there's around 330 swarms in the network. The swarm is basically a collection of 5 to 7 nodes in the network. And basically they'll replicate data. So if you send a message to one node, it will also replicate that message to the other 5 to 7 nodes in its swarm. That means like if one of the nodes goes offline, there's still 6 other nodes in that swarm holding the message to ensure that you don't lose message content if one of the nodes leaves the network or goes offline temporarily. So when you're sending a message on Session, you're doing this onion routing, but then you're storing it on one node, which then replicates it to another 6 nodes, and then the recipient fetches that from their swarm. So there's all of these. When you're dealing with decentralized networks, it's like you have to think a lot more about what would happen if one of the nodes wasn't available or went offline or was malicious. So it's a lot harder of an architectural problem than just, okay, let's spin up a centralized server that's going to store all of the messages forever, and we'll just ensure that node is online all of the time. So yeah, it's a bit of a trickier design problem.
I see. Cool. Yeah. So basically, even if like few nodes, but I guess the idea is that you want to spread out the message over multiple nodes, right? So that it can only live on, right? So that it cannot be.
So you said it can only leave?
I don't know. What I said is that the message, let's say a message on Session, you want the message to stay or live on, I guess like persist on multiple nodes, right? Yeah. So that it cannot be lost.
Exactly. And the nodes in the network will store a message for 14 days. That's like the default time that they store it for, and then they clear the message from their storage. And that ensures that the storage that nodes are required to have doesn't grow infinitely, because you're clearing old messages every 14 days. And then also Session also has disappearing messages as well. And those basically modify the time that the storage server will store for, or one of the nodes in the swarm will store for. So if if I want to have a disappearing message conversation with you where every message disappears after 5 minutes, then actually like when you read that message, it will go back to that node and it will tell it, okay, instead of deleting after 14 days, delete after 5 minutes. And then that timer will start on that node as well. So you can clear it from the network faster than 14 days.
Cool. So interesting. Yeah, and then you mentioned earlier that saying it's like peer-to-peer messaging app, so kind of you said somewhat similar to Signal, WhatsApp, but I guess main thing here is that what you say is like on very censorship resistant. What do you say is like the quality that make it like different?
Yeah, so I think like one of the main things is censorship resistance. So, in the case of Signal or Telegram or one of these larger messaging applications, the messages are actually being stored on their servers. So they then have to have policies about what messages can or can't be stored on their servers. In the case of Session, the developers of Session or, their STF, which is the Session Foundation, they don't actually run a majority of the nodes in the network. The nodes are run by community operators all around the world. So it's actually up to them, like whether they want to, store a particular message or not store a particular message. Every message is end-to-end encrypted, so they can't actually see the contents, but they can themselves as a node operator, decide whether they want to store something or not. So it moves the responsibility of message storage and like content moderation of one-to-one and small groups out of the hands of the developers of the application and puts it in the hands of the node operators that are actually running the network. And that's like, quite similar to say Bitcoin and Ethereum, where it's not the responsibility of the Ethereum Foundation to say, what is or isn't on the Ethereum network. It's actually the responsibility of the Ethereum validators to decide what is and isn't on the Ethereum network. So it's a similar idea in that way. It's like you move things from a centralized context into a decentralized context, and then you allow the operators of those nodes to decide what they will and won't serve. So from one side, that's the censorship resistant side, but also from a data perspective, a lot of messaging applications are having an issue where, some sort of third party will come to them or they'll get hacked, and all of the messages, including all of the message metadata, is on their central servers. So even if the messages are end-to-end encrypted, if you signed up with a phone number or you spoke to one of those servers using your raw IP address, then there's a lot of metadata that centralized server ends up collecting. Even if they don't want to, they just have access to it because of the way that, the internet works and the way that you interact with these messaging systems. In the case of Session, there isn't like a central developer who has access to all of this metadata. First of all, like metadata is like drastically reduced by using onion routing and not requiring a phone number to sign up. But also like the metadata is effectively split across 2,200 different nodes run by, hundreds of different operators all around the world. So if you wanted to get a very accurate picture of what was going on the network, you would need to go to like each individual operator and say like, hey, give me, the data about this, about this time period, for example, where you were storing messages. And that's just like much harder to do from a like logistics perspective, but also like breaks the network into a lot of different geolocations as well. So there's nodes being run in like, probably like 40, 50 different countries all around the world. And each of those countries will have their own rules and regulations about, what the operator can do and what the operator can't do. So you kind of get this jurisdictional arbitrage as well between the node operators that are running the network, which means like they have to comply with their laws, but they're all in different locations. So it's hard to kind of like fit all of these things together and come up with like a single location where you can just say, we're going to get the data from just this source. So it makes it much harder for hackers, makes it much harder for third parties to like come and request a bunch of data about users.
Cool. I think that's like one of the true ethos of Web3, right? Decentralization. Whereas like
100%.
decentralized enough that, like no centralized authority can even try to crack down or shut it down. Kind of like Bitcoin, I suppose. So, can you explain onion routing? Because I think that's a technical term. Probably not many of my listeners would understand. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So like maybe the easiest way to understand onion routing is as an extension of VPNs. So most people would be familiar with what a VPN does. It's an app that you typically download to your phone. When you turn it on, it essentially creates an encrypted connection between you and the VPN server. So say the VPN server is in Sweden or something and you're in the US. Like essentially what happens is your connection is encrypted to that Swedish node and then decrypted at the Swedish node level. And then the Swedish node will send it to the final destination that you're trying to get to. There's usually another layer of encryption here. If you're browsing the web, that's HTTPS. So even the VPN provider can't typically read the exact information that you're requesting, or that that's being returned from the server that you're requesting data from. But they will be able to see like the location that you're going to. So that's like typically the idea of a VPN. What onion routing does is it basically adds additional hops. So if you can imagine a VPN is like one hop, onion routing is typically 3 hops. So you have, the first server that you talk to who talks to a second server, who talks to a third server, and then the third server is the one that actually talks to the destination. And there's a special encryption process which happens and this is where the idea of an onion comes in, to encrypt the data that you're sending for the last node, and it's kind of encrypted in layers. So you encrypt for the last node first, then you encrypt for the second node, then you encrypt for the first node. And when you send your packet over, the first node will unwrap one layer of encryption and see the next destination it needs to send to. Then the second node will get it, unwrap another layer of encryption, and then send it to the third node. And the third node will also unwrap a layer of encryption and send it to the destination. So essentially, like by doing this, you're ensuring that no single party in the network has like a full view of the destination that you're talking to. So instead of like in a VPN where the VPN server knows exactly who you're talking to, the first hop in an onion routing path only knows that you're talking, that your path is talking to the second hop, and the second hop only knows the last hop and the next hop, and then the last hop knows the destination but doesn't know the origin of the essentially like the message that was being sent. So you're kind of splitting information across several different parties to reduce the amount that any single party can get if they were compromised. So that's broadly the idea of onion routing.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool, actually. So do you guys work? I think has this been implemented in, I don't know, some other software system before? Like, why did you guys choose this onion routing?
Yeah, so the concept of onion routing is pretty old at this point, actually. I think that one of the first projects to put onion routing into production and scale it is called Tor. And Tor is like a private internet browser. They also have like kind of internal websites. They're not fully decentralized. There's still some centralization there, but the nodes that run Tor are a community operated network. So there's people all around the world that run these relays, which are used in the onion routing network. So that's kind of where the idea came from. And we have kind of re-implemented onion routing on top of the session node network of 2200 nodes. So we don't use the nodes that are used in Tor for onion routing, but we use the same protocol, or a very similar protocol, a protocol that implements onion routing, but it's on top of that decentralized network of 2200 nodes.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think that sounds really cool. So I think my understanding is that, like, let's say that, so it's like only the adjacent connection, right? They only be able to know the content of the adjacent connection. Like you said, so like the third, or is it the last point would only know like the point before that, and then the first point only know the point after it. Then like there's somewhere in the middle here that they cannot know, right?
Yeah, the person in the middle only knows the previous hop and the next hop.
Next hop, okay.
The first hop knows the user's like actual IP address because you're connecting from yourself to that first node, but it doesn't know the destination that you're talking to, which is like one of the more important points. And then the middle knows the two hops on either side, and then the last hop knows the destination you're talking to, but not your IP address when you're coming into the network. So it's kind of like splitting that information between several different unrelated parties, such that, if you compromise a single node in the network, you never get a full informational view.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. So I'm quite curious about like the user session. I guess so I think one thing we have seen a lot more now with the proliferation of AI, right? And then bots is that like there's a lot more like, I guess, intelligent chatbots now being, but then I think with that come with the challenge is like, how do you actually verify someone is like a actual human that you're talking to, right? Whether say as you're talking with a bot, like, are you talking with a bot who's just trying to scam or spam you, right? So is there a way that you guys do for session to make it prove that you're human? I know you said like there's no phone number needed, right, to require registration. So how do you prevent that issue though?
Yeah, so we don't require that you prove yourself, that you prove that you're a human, because if you were signing up and you had to do some sort of proof of humanhood, that would probably require some sort of real world identity, like verification or something like that, which would be defeating like some of the privacy purposes of session. So the main like system to control spam, at least in one-on-ones and groups, is that session requires you to explicitly connect to another user. So if someone sends you a message randomly, first of all, they need to like discover your identity on the network, which is what we call an account ID. So it's 66 character random string of numbers and letters. Looks very similar to a Bitcoin address, for example. So you can't know all of the addresses on the network. There isn't some sort of central repository of those. And there's so many different combinations that you couldn't just like guess them. So you actually need to know a user's account ID to be able to send a message to them. So that already limits like the amount of spam that you can receive, because it's not based on a username where anyone can reach out to you. And there's also some controls around when you join communities and stuff as well, that you're not sharing your real identity. So it cuts down spam from that side. But when someone sends you a message, it goes into a different folder. So we call this system message requests. And that's essentially like a folder which is, outside of your normal conversation list. You have to go into that folder and then accept the user. And then you can start sending messages back and forth with each other. So from that perspective, like, first of all, it's hard to like just randomly discover users on the network unless you know their session ID. And then also like once you have discovered a user, they also need to like explicitly accept the connection. So that cuts down on a lot of the like spam that, other messaging applications have a big problem with.
Cool. Yeah, good to know. Yeah, because to be honest, I've tried out a few different messaging app, and then some messaging app I think have better design than the others. Let's just say there's one messaging app, I'm not gonna name any names here, but it was like, I feel it was super spammy. I think they were just like farming token to say, and then like, well, either the user, I mean the user was just farming token, right? Because they know there would be like some sort of incentive to try it out. So there was just like way too much bots and spam. Sometimes you don't even know you're talking to a real human. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that's maybe like one of the bigger issues, especially with consumer apps these days in the crypto world, is that they're often like very tied to token incentives, especially early on. So people will build out these kind of consumer applications, which are, usually like a little bit cool, like they have some cool features, but then like they'll offer a token incentive program or a points program to users of the application, such that they can earn points or earn tokens for every day that they use the application, or for how much activity that they produce in the application. And what ends up happening is that, they'll have tens of millions of users using the service. And then once the airdrop happened, everyone just leaves and the thing is like completely abandoned. So you need to be like very careful about that side of things, that you're not just growing users that are going to abandon like the network straight away. So that's like at Session, we've been very careful about that. And there's never been any like token incentive to use the application or anything like that. So all of the users, we have around 1.2 million monthly active users. Those users are like natural and organic users. They're not, people who are farming some airdrops program. So, that from that side, it's like much less spammy, and also like, that like once the token launches, like these users aren't just going to abandon the network, which is a good thing.
Nice. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think we probably seen a lot of those like situation where users kind of farm it, and then as long as as soon as the farming season or the airdrop's over, right? It's like suddenly, the number of users just like kind of go down, right? Yeah, it's quite wild. So who would you say is like the main user of like session? Is there some categories that you can put the users into? Curious.
So right now I'd say it's mostly like privacy focused individuals. So the people who, would use other tools like Proton Mail and maybe other encrypted messaging applications, maybe more like private cryptocurrencies and stuff like that. So it's mostly focused on a very like privacy focused user base, because that is what Session, offers, in enhancement to other messaging applications. It's like better metadata privacy, more censorship resistance, more decentralization. So it tends to be attracting people who want more privacy in their messaging experience. I think that's allowed Session to grow itself in a niche, a fairly large niche, because we're talking about, millions of monthly active users here. But I think like to expand into larger market, Session needs to kind of rebrand itself a little bit, like not change the brand completely, but become a little bit more user friendly, make connecting with users easier. We've been talking about some stuff like deep links. So being able to really easily invite someone just by providing them a link, and then they can install the application really easily. It's about kind of opening like Session up more to the general user base, like people who want more privacy and security, but aren't necessarily, hardcore like privacy enthusiasts.
Interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like you guys mainly focusing on like privacy enthusiasts. Yeah. I think, I mean, this is what I just heard. Yeah. Of course, I don't know Signal particular detail, but I feel like a lot of people using Signal also for that particular reason. I've heard from some friends like they only want to use Signal because it's like secure, right? So that's just the feedback that I heard. Interesting. And then I'm curious, so like about in like the early days, right? I think you said you began building this on 2017, 2018, right? Somewhere around the time. And then so was it pretty easy to get the first? Was it easy or hard to get the first 100 and then 1,000 users in the beginning?
Look, I would say like the hardest part was probably like building out the network that Session runs on top of. So this network of 2,200 nodes that actually like runs this storage and routing infrastructure for the entire network. Building that out was a very complicated experience. And in 2018, there wasn't actually so many like proof of stake networks or networks where you had nodes that were actually doing useful work and coming to consensus on things. It was more focused on, mining and block production through those methods. So building the network was probably the hardest part. When we initially released the messaging application, we released it more as a proof of concept. So we had built this network of nodes, and we wanted to show that you could build a messaging system on top of that, because messaging is like fairly generalizable. Like, if you can do messaging, you can do a lot of other things on top of the network. You can build other applications. So we wanted to build a messenger as a kind of proof of concept of what you could do on top of the network. But when we put it out, I think immediately like we started to see like a lot of adoption from privacy enthusiasts, just because like Session at that point was the only decentralized network where you could send messages to people that were offline because they were actually being stored on this network temporarily. It was one of the only messaging applications where you didn't need a phone number to sign up, and that it also did this private routing as well. So it added a bunch of properties that weren't in the messaging space before. So we actually saw a bunch of users come on very early. And that's, I think, like when, it started to be like, okay, maybe this isn't just a proof of concept. Like maybe this is something that we should be focusing on and developing further. So, from that point onwards, because we were seeing that natural growth, it made a lot more sense to focus on Session as an actual product, and then kind of focus the network more around Session rather than just being a developer platform where people can come along and build their own applications. So that's like kind of the shift that has happened from the original founding to now, where the focus is like almost purely around session as a product and how that can be improved and how the user experience can be improved.
Nice. I see. Yeah. Well, you guys, I'm sure you've gone quite a long road. Yeah. I'm sure it wasn't like easy to go, to get to like 2200 nodes, right? Yeah. Right now. So what is like the consensus mechanism for these nodes to
So it's
be
a proof of stake based consensus mechanism. So it's kind of in a transitionary phase right now because we actually have our own layer one, which is operating, and that's actually a fork of a privacy coin called Monero. So that is an existing layer one, which is one of the first. I mean, I think it is the first proof of stake based like crypto note coin, I guess, or crypto night coin. Like it's one of the taking essentially the Monero code and modifying that to be proof of stake, and then also developing this like network of nodes on top of it. So we're in a bit of a transition right now, coming from the layer one to moving to a layer two Arbitrum. And there'll be a transition for the token as well as it comes across from the layer one to the layer two. So we're kind of in a bit of a transitionary phase where we have one consensus model, which is used to create and validate blocks, which is entirely proof of stake on the layer one. And we're moving into a model, which is actually a set of smart contracts on Arbitrum, which are also governed by this network of 2200 nodes. But because we're no longer, going to be our own layer one, it's a lot, you have to kind of design the system a lot differently to be much more efficient in the data that it's storing on the Arbitrum chain. So even though Arbitrum fees are extremely low, still, if we were to take like the exact system that we have on the layer one and try and represent that exactly on the layer two, like the gas fees would just be enormous. So kind of have to redesign everything. And most of that is using these BLS signatures, which are these very efficient signature scheme, which you can aggregate really well and then represent like consensus from an off-chain set of nodes and take that on-chain very efficiently and validate it on-chain. So that's like something that we've been kind of, in the process of redesigning for the last, 6 months.
Nice. I see. Yeah. So you said you're like folk of Monero, right? And I mean, I think we both know Monero has been around for a pretty long time. What was the reason for choosing Monero in the beginning? Or was it because it was already like a good base and then to build on?
Yeah, so like at the start of the project, I kind of talked about how we like have changed, or the session teams like changed its focus over time. The first idea behind the project was to build an entire privacy stack. So you would have a private cryptocurrency, you would have a private like node network or like network of nodes on top of that private cryptocurrency, which would provide private communications. And then you could also build applications, private applications on top of that network of nodes. So you were kind of tackling every layer of the stack, the currency layer, the networking layer, and then also the application layer. And the idea was to have like this developer platform where you could kind of leverage every aspect of, the stack and build applications where you could make payments privately, you could send messages privately, and then you could also have these apps on top. I think that was like a very ambitious vision out of the gate. It's like you would be building, like to do something like that, you would be building like a revolution on every single front. And I think like over time, like the people who work on session have like realized, okay, maybe it's better to just like focus on a single like element of this, which is private communications, and build everything else around that to support that vision. So I think that's where like things are moving now. It's like we still have the node network and that will always be the case because that's powering session. But the cryptocurrency side of things, the private payment side of things, there's already kind of good solutions out there for making private payments. So I feel like it's competing on that front as well as the messaging front splits your focus a lot. So I think it's a lot better of an idea just to, laser focus on one particular area, solve that really well, and, have the rest of the ecosystem be focused on that particular area as well, rather than splitting your focus.
Yeah, I think that completely makes sense. I mean, you cannot be like the best, right, in all like 4 or 5 different areas. You can only choose maybe one or two, right? So yeah, better focus on your strength rather than like spread too thin and then you have like a half-baked product, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And then so you said we're seeing this like a POS, right? So I guess like there will be rewards for the node runner. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if you run a session node on the network, you receive tokens as a reward for operating that node on the network. You also have to stake as well to become a node on the network. So you grab a certain amount of session tokens or Oxen in the current ecosystem. You stake those tokens and then you earn a reward for routing and storing users' messages on the network, and also like creating and validating new blocks in the network as well. So that's the way it is right now. There's both a barrier to entry through a stake and then also a reward for operating nodes on the network.
Cool. Yeah, one thing I'm always curious about, like with POS, is that type of network is that how do these how does these like runners like operate? Are these like individual? Are these like company? Do they run it out of their own, I don't know, workplace? Run it on the cloud? What is like the typical setup structure you can share if you know?
Yeah, I can only really speak to what is the case like in the session network. But I think what we've seen mostly is very motivated individuals. So not necessarily companies that are coming in and running nodes, just people who really believe in privacy and security. They may have been a session user as well. Like they started using session and then they started to deep dive on session and found out a little bit more about how the network operates and then wanted to run their own node. That's unique as well because if you're a really prolific Telegram user, for example, or Signal user, you can't like go and spin up Signal nodes, which are going to store and route messages. So people who are really keen on session and like the vision often end up becoming operators in the network because they like the vision, they want to power things. They also want to earn rewards from running nodes in the network. So that's often the case. That it's usually individuals. And typically what is happening is that they'll go to like a data center or like one of these online VPS hosts. So like Hetzner or DigitalOcean or one of these kind of cloud providers. And they'll usually just like spin up a VPS on one of those services and then they'll host the node there. There is some people who run nodes at home. The only issue with that is like if you have a power outage or your internet service provider like goes down for a period of time, you have to like be online consistently. Otherwise you get kicked off the network by like there's a self-policing system where nodes kind of monitor each other and then vote on each other. So you need to ensure that your node is always online and serving people. So it's a bit riskier to have it in a home like network setup where, if your Wi-Fi turns off or something, like the node is done. So yeah, it's typically individual operators using cloud services.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'm still a bit curious on that. So I'm curious for those operators, do the economics kind of make sense for them? Like as in like rewards come in with outpace the cost over
Yeah.
time?
So in some ways it's similar to Bitcoin mining, for example. So like the economics always make sense if that well, let me try and explain that more. But it's like if you're a Bitcoin miner on the network and you're unprofitable, you will leave the network, and by leaving the network you reduce the overall hash rate of the network,
Yeah.
which means the operators that stay on the network are actually earning a bit more profit. Because the hash rate's going down, they need to produce less hashes to mine a Bitcoin block. It's a similar idea in the node network as well. So you have a fixed amount of reward that is being paid out per block, for example, and everyone is kind of competing to get that block. So if there's 10,000 nodes on the network, then the rewards that are paid out per block are split equally between those 10,000 nodes. If there's only 5,000 nodes on the network, the reward is increased proportionally to all of the nodes. So you essentially reach this equilibrium point eventually where the number of nodes on the network supports the amount of tokens that those nodes are being rewarded. And if the token price drops or goes down, essentially that adjusts. So if the token price goes down, what you see is like some node operators leaving the network and then that boosting the kind of profits for the node operators that stay on the network. And there's like a little bit of competition to run nodes as efficiently as possible while still meeting the requirements to not be kicked off the network. So it's kind of like this balancing point that the market naturally comes to support like, running nodes and also like being able to cover your costs.
Nice, cool. So I'm sure you guys probably designed some of this in like the white paper, right? Back in the day, so that the
Yeah.
tokenomics had somehow worked out, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like in 2018, we had a lot of ideas about how, we could design a system like this. And this was fairly early on. There weren't many proof of stake networks in 2018. So we kind of took a few guesses at how things would work and just adjusted things as we went along to make sure that the network was, properly operating. But, it wasn't until like way later that Ethereum came along and kind of fleshed out a lot of these things more, like with more detail. So that's been really good. And a lot of like proof of stake networks have also like come along since then. Since 2020, a lot of proof of stake networks started to come online. So we kind of learned a little bit from them as well.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think now that like I think the technology to build a new chain nowadays is pretty proven, and I would say like somewhat mature, right? You have so many different like tech stacks out there that one can choose to build or migrate, right? I guess in your case more like migrate, right? Yeah, from your existing blockchain to a new one. Yeah. Cool. Yes, actually I'm curious about the people behind the company session, right? Could you share a bit more like how many people in your company at the moment?
Yeah, so Session's like fairly distributed. There is a core steward of the project, which is the Session Technology Foundation. That's based in Switzerland. And there's a few people working there. And then there's like Session contributors, which are kind of all spread around the world. Some in the US, some in Australia, some in Europe. Like, so there's people all around the world that are working on Session. So yeah, I mean, it's built up from a team of, in 2018 that there were 4 original people working on the project, and it's kind of scaled up to that point. And there's probably 20 plus people working on Session, like day to day or part time, or in various different roles, like trying to contribute to the protocol.
Nice, cool. And you said there's like 4 original co-founder, including you. How did you guys meet? I think this is a question that many of the entrepreneurs they always want to know. And my podcast is mainly Web3 and entrepreneurship, right? So it's like someone mix. I think many of the aspiring entrepreneurs always want to know, like, oh, how do I meet my co-founder? Do I begin solo? Like, could you share that story?
Yeah, so like that would take us back to kind of 2017, where I was going to university and was started to get interested in blockchain and started to go to these Bitcoin meetups, which were in Melbourne at the time, and they were just down at this like local kind of center that was above a pizza shop. And I remember coming in 2017 where we hadn't had that massive run up yet. Things were like fairly tame at that point, and there was maybe like 10 or 15 people just sitting around in a circle talking about Bitcoin and crypto and like what this could be. And the co-founders of Session were the people in that circle of like people that were just talking to each other. So we experienced like that massive run up, and every time we would come to the meetup there would be more people there like wanting to learn about cryptocurrency. So, it started at like 10 or 15 people. And, by the time that Bitcoin was at its absolute top in 2018, I think there was like 250 people there. Like, it was massive. They had to go to like a different building. It became huge. And I think it was just like through talking with people there, there was an earlier like project that also kind of started up in that blockchain community, which kind of revealed like, who was like the people who were like really interested in working on this technology and wanted to commit time to it. So like, we kind of took the best people from there and then, started this new company, which was like very serious and wanted to actually like push forward on an actual technology.
Nice. Yeah, that's really inspiring, right? Yeah, I guess when you never know where you would meet your potential co-founder, right? That's really
Yeah.
random. Yeah.
Look, I would say like a meetup is a fantastic like place. Like we just go on. That was like organized through meetup.com, I think.
Oh yeah.
And like, if it's an emerging technology, especially like if you get in early and there's like a core group of people who really believe in this like technology, and you can chat with them. And usually like these are young like people as well, because like there's a bit more of a barrier to get over if you already have existing like view of like financial technology or decentralized technology. So usually it's a bunch of like young people who are like very idealistic about things, and also like willing to like put in the blood, sweat, and tears like to build something. It doesn't come easy, obviously. So yeah, I would say like if you're looking for someone to work on a project with you, like meetups are a fantastic resource to use to try and like meet the first couple of people you might start something with.
Cool. Yeah. And then I remember you said like, so after you meeting your co-founder, and then you got funding back in like 2018, right, to begin the project, and then you guys started working full time on that. So I'm curious. So I know that typically when company organization get funding from VC, they usually expect some sort of a business model, right? What is the business model of Session?
Yeah, so the idea behind the business model is a freemium type model. So similar to say Telegram Premium, where users pay a subscription fee that's $4.99 a month, which gives them access to increased file uploads, larger groups, more profile customizability, custom emojis, custom stickers, all of these things that power users, particularly of the application, love to use. And there's probably 1 to 3% of the Telegram user base is actually paying for Telegram Premium. So the idea in Session is very similar. So we will have a service called Session Pro that will offer a bunch of different premium features like larger file uploads, increased profile customizability. Essentially, the fee that is paid there is a network fee that's paid to the network into this pool. It's called the like staking rewards pool. Essentially, the nodes on the network get paid out from that pool. So, essentially you have a circular economy, essentially, where the nodes are providing service to the network by validating blocks, validating messages, relaying messages, storing messages, and transactions. And then on the other side, you have the users, which the users that are buying premium features, and those users are essentially buying session tokens and then sending those back to the pool. So it kind of creates this circular system. There's a little bit more to it in terms of, maybe users don't want to pay directly with crypto, if they're not experienced with crypto. So the idea there is that there'll be like third-party payment providers where you can pay in fiat, and then they'll convert those fiat to session tokens. The session tokens are then burned and then reminted back into the pool to pay out those nodes that operate the network. So that's broadly the long-term sustainability model for Session.
I see. So right now, can user pay in both crypto and fiat, or just crypto?
So Session Pro, what I just described to you there, isn't implemented into the application yet.
Oh, okay.
There is some monetization adjacent things. So we have like a name system, for example. So, typically on Session, when you start a Session account, you'll get this long account ID, which is, 66 characters that you have to send to another person. There's a similar system in Session to Ethereum. Ethereum has ENS, which allows you to map a human readable name to your Ethereum address. In Session, we'll have SNS. We have a system called ONS right now, which allows you to map a human readable name to an actual account ID on the network. So now you can just add me just by knowing my human readable name. And that's stored on the blockchain. And when you do that, there's essentially some tokens that are burned to allow you to register that name on the network. So similar idea to ENS there, but the protocol is actually collecting the value in the name system and then using that to make the network sustainable.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think many people on my podcast familiar with like Ethereum name service. Yeah. So being like a decentralized team with a lot of contributor, and he said there's like two main organization, right? The foundation and then the contributors. What are some of the challenges facing your team?
I think the the biggest challenge is like finding ways to scale session while still keeping its core of like privacy and security. So like growing the user base, I think is the most important thing for session. If session is able to reach the point where it has 40, 50 million monthly active users, then the ability to have some of those users turn into premium users makes the network more sustainable and allows the application to grow even more. So it's hard to scale consumer applications, especially like when you're working with a decentralized stack, and also just hard to scale consumer applications in general. Like even to have, millions of users download your application and use it monthly, like there's not actually that many applications out there that have, a million monthly active users. It's quite rare. So to be able to reach that point is already an achievement in itself, but to scale to 50 million monthly active users is another challenge altogether. And you have to, the approach that you use to get to 1 million users is not necessarily the approach that you have to use to get to 50 million users. For us, I think it was a lot easier because we were such a unique application, to get those first users wasn't the most difficult thing. It's really been about like growing out of the privacy niche, the privacy communities that love and use session every day, and making like people, general users, aware of session and getting them to download it and making sure that they have a really positive user experience. So I'd say like that's probably the biggest challenge that faces our team. I think we have some really good approaches on how to like get across that barrier. But it's like, I think it is the biggest thing for session.
Yeah, for sure. I think what you said is completely true. Especially the part that I feel like, to scale from, I would say like, 0 to 100, and then maybe 100 to 10,000 and 10,000 to 1,000,000, right? I think that each got to take a different type of approach, right? And then afterward, I always said like 1 million to 40, 50 million. I feel like if you hit that mark already, then you probably already like quite mainstream, right? As in like most people would probably know or heard or know through some of the connection in some way, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Like Signal has around 50 million monthly active users. They don't publish their numbers all the time, but I think it's between 50 and 70 million monthly active users. And most people would know, or most people in the tech space would know what Signal is. But Signal is not on the level of WhatsApp. Like WhatsApp has 3 billion users, and basically everyone in the world knows what WhatsApp is. So like, you think that you've reached a level of scale, but really that's like sometimes can fool you. A lot of tech people know about Signal, but if you were to go and ask your grandmother or something, she probably doesn't know what it is, but she might know what WhatsApp is.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. Yeah, and then so I think somewhere in between that is like Telegram, right? It's like 900 million. Yeah, huge. But yeah, I think to get to those numbers, it's quite hard. It has to be like organic growth. I don't think you can grow by pay ads or things like that at that point. That scale, I don't think it will work like that. But anyway, cool. So looking into the future, like how will session, right? And then, but I guess in general, like Web3 messaging apps like evolve in the future. What's your take?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a lot more focus on the integration side of things. So, in China, they have WeChat, which is basically not just a messaging application. It's also the primary method that people use to pay for things, for peer-to-peer payments. It's also the primary method that people use to like order like things online, because they have these mini apps that you can go into and you can like order food in your mini apps and stuff. So I think we're starting to see some of the decentralized or more Web3 focused messaging apps go into that space. So obviously last year, a big narrative was around Telegram mini apps, which a really great idea. I don't think they executed on it perfectly. It became a bit more like farming related, that people would have these kind of like clicking games, like Hamster Combat and stuff, where they would get coins. But I think like that's just the early stage of what mini apps and wallet integration can do inside of messaging applications. I think the ultimate vision of like some of what is being built in the Web3 messaging space is that it's not just a messaging application. It's also potentially like a payment or like financial like rails, and also like potentially a place for mini apps to be hosted as well. So you're talking then more about like wallet integration, and then also like building these like kind of frames inside of the application that developers can use to distribute to their users. So I think like that's where things are moving, and I think we'll see a lot more of like messaging apps starting to encompass more of your life as it is in China, but in this case with more privacy and security, and the government can't read all of your messages.
Yeah, and I think that's important, especially for like privacy conscious individual. Cool. And then a general question, like how I'm not sure. Do you guys have any plan to? I assume right now there's no like artificial intelligence integration, right? But is there any plan to integrate any of that into your application going forward? Or is that something
No,
even necessary?
no, yeah, no massive like AI integrations on the roadmap right now. The one that I could think of that would be somewhat interesting would be kind of the ability to have like a chat like application, like, or kind of, most of these AI tools you interact with through a chat interface. So chat GPT, like Grok, you're going to these websites, you're putting in information, and then it's giving you a response, which is not very private, obviously, because you're connecting directly with your IP address. You often are signing up with an account that's using, either your real world identity or like is linked to some sort of email address. And then you're giving up a lot of like personal information as well to those chat tools. With something like Session, you can imagine that someone could host like a AI chatbot on Session where you can send it questions or queries or prompts, and then it gets back to you, and it doesn't actually know the user that is prompting it. It doesn't know any metadata about them. It just knows the prompt that it's receiving, and then is able to send a response back. So I think something like that could be quite interesting. That's probably not something that would be built into like the core protocol. It's just something that like maybe a bot framework could enable people to talk to, AI tools through Session and achieve more privacy that way.
I see. Yeah, makes sense. So I guess somewhat using like decentralized AI, right, to make sure that as opposed to centralized AI where they can collect all the chat history and
Well,
what you communicate.
it could even just be centralized AI. Like if someone is running a bot and they're receiving prompts and they process those prompts in a centralized manner, and then they send the response back through Session, you're still achieving more privacy there than if you go directly to the AI's website and you are connecting with your IP address and you're signing in with an account. So it doesn't even necessarily need to be like decentralized AI. It just needs to be like someone is hosting an account on Session and they're receiving messages, which are prompts. They're resolving those and then sending the response back to the user.
I see. Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Yeah, it's just two more questions. If we close out the show here, do you have any advice for people who want to build their own Web3 startup or company?
I got to think about that one. I think you have to be like very like convicted in your vision. Like you have to have very strong convictions to build in this space, especially when it comes to surviving bear markets, because things can look very frothy. The market can be going crazy. You can think like, oh, I'm a genius, like, building this particular thing. And valuations can also get crazy as well, like on different products. So it's important to have a solid like conviction that, I'm building this thing, and when the money moves out of the space, that you're still there, you're still solid, you're still working on it day by day by day. And then when the bull market eventually does come back, which, it's a cycle, it kind of dips and then comes back. And we've seen this like for 3 years, that you've been building through the entire bear market, and your product is like at a very like fantastic point, and then it can get picked up again as one of the narratives in that cycle. So I'd say like, if you're getting in the middle of a bull market and everything's going crazy, you just need to be very sure that your convictions are there and that you'll stand by things, even if the money, dries up for a period of time.
Yeah, that's true. I think many other Web3 experts and entrepreneurs have also said similar things to me on my podcast as well. Where it's like, I think they said like the best time to build is actually during the bear market, because you can just put your heads down, focus. There's not a lot of noise and distraction from the market, like pricing, whatever things as a thing, whatever the fancy shining thing that's happening in the bull market. It's like it's all gone in the bear market. So cool. Yeah, that's a solid advice. Final question: where can people follow you and your company? Feel free to share any public handles or username where you want people to follow you and or your company.
Yeah, so like the main website for Session is getsession.org. So if you go there, you can download the application. This is the website here. So it's on iOS, Android, desktop, so Mac, Linux, and Windows. Basically cross-platform. You can download Session, use it on any device that you have. I'd also encourage you, like we have Twitter as well. So if you just look up Session there or you Google Session, you'll find it immediately. And you can follow us there too. If you want to reach out to me on Session as well, my information's on my Twitter and also just on GitHub and all of that stuff. So you can reach out to me if you had any questions or anything, stirred any interests in this podcast, which hopefully it has.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure to put all the links in the show notes so that viewers can also get access, follow you and your company, and then to download Session as well. Cool. And Kee Jefferys, thank you so much again for joining the podcast today. It's been a real pleasure talking about Session. I wish you and your co-founder the best of luck moving forward.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And it was some very good questions there as well. So yeah, thanks.
Awesome. And we're back to my studio. I find Session architecture quite interesting and how they have made it so that it's sustainable for the node runners who believe in their mission. If you have used Session before or deeply care about privacy, please leave a comment below to tell us what you think about this episode. For the next episode, we'll be talking to John Johns. He's one of the co-founders and CBO at Supra. Supra is considered an all-in-one layer 1 due to the vertical integration of different blockchain services. Supra has high throughput, native bridging, native oracles, built-in automation, randomness, and compatible with other VMs. If you enjoyed this episode, please give a like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. Thank you for watching and see you next time.